Oh, hiyo! Didn't notice you there. I was just writing some Python code and I've noticed that it's surprisingly slow. But maybe it's just me and my code is not really slow, so I have to figure out a way to measure it. So I was thinking, well, I often find myself in a situation where I want to see how slow some code is. I would love to have a function that will measure it for me, and not something that I have to actively run for the measurement, but just something that will run automatically. Oh, and I want it to be integrated into my Python shell. And there is a perfect tool I can use for that. I can write an extension for IPython. Some of you maybe never heard of IPython. Well, if you know Jupyter Notebooks, then IPython is this cool Python REPL that powers it. In general, IPython is a Python REPL, but it's much better than the built-in one. Since it's a drop-in replacement for standard Python REPL, you can just install it with pip, and then you just run IPython instead of Python. And pretty much that's it. You have all the commands there, you have some syntax highlighting. IPython has a ton of cool features, and I covered a lot of them in a video called Wait, IPython Can Do That. One of those features are extensions. You can write an extension that, when loaded, will modify any part of IPython. You can define some custom key bindings, you can define some events, etc. In my case, I want an extension that, when activated, will print the execution time of each command that I run. And just to make it a bit more interesting, I've decided to write this extension without leaving IPython. So we start IPython and we can't quit until the extension is ready and working. It's probably not going to work, and I would never try it while live coding, but this is pre-recorded. I promise not to cheat. So how do we make an IPython extension? Well, first we need to create a new file inside the .ipython/extensions directory. That's the local extensions directory. So if you put some files there, IPython will be able to load them with the load extension command. So the easiest way is to move to that directory. And with IPython, you can actually execute shell commands by adding exclamation mark. So let's give it a try. And for most common shell commands, you don't even have to add the exclamation marks. So now that we are here, we have to create a new file. I'm gonna name it timer. And to edit our new file, we can either run vim or we can use the edit magic command. I like the edit command more because, first of all, when you use it and you close the file, IPython will automatically execute it. And next time you want to edit the same file, you just use edit with -p parameter. So you don't have to remember the full path to the file. So how is our timer going to work? Well, I want to start the timer, execute a command in IPython, stop the timer, and then print how long did it take. For this, I can use something called events. IPython events lets you plug some callback functions that will be executed before or after the cell is executed. So since I have to store this time somewhere, I'm going to use a class to encapsulate my events. So we start with a class. Okay, so we have our function, and you might be wondering, why do we have this info and result parameters that we are not using? Well, IPython events expect a certain signature of a function. So if you want to have an event that will be called before a given cell is run, it will always provide you with information about a given cell. And the same for the event that is called when after the cell is run, you will get an argument with the results of that cell. So we have a class, and now we actually have to register those two functions with appropriate events. To do that, we need to define the load IPython extension function. This is the function that will be called when we load our extension. And inside that function, we register two events. First, we register the before function of our timer as the pre-run cell event, and then we register the after function as our post-run cell event. So we can close this file and load our extension. And you see that we get an error. Although the extension seems to be working. That's because when we loaded the extension, the after function was executed, but before function was not. So self.timer is set to none, and we can actually go and fix it with a simple check. So we go back and edit the same file as before. And now we just check if self.timer is defined. If not, we don't do anything. If it is, we return how long it took to execute some command. So we can close this file. And now we can reload our extension. And now it's working fine. Except that now we have two extensions loaded because we didn't define a function to unload our extension. So now each time we load our extension, we're gonna register those two events over and over and over. And while it looks funny, it's not very useful for us. So let's write another function to unload our extension. As you may probably guessed, to unload an extension, we just have to write unload IPython extension function. The only problem here is that this code won't work. You see, that's because this t before callback that we register in the load function is not the same as the t before callback that we try to unregister. So to fix that, we can, for example, move the initialization of the timer outside of the load and unload function. So we'll be creating only one instance. So that's our final version of the extension. We can close it. Whoa, that took us some time. And what happened if we reload? You can see that we are no longer loading new extensions, but we still have those 4 extensions that we loaded before. You could get rid of them by just starting a new IPython. But as I said, we are not going to leave our initial IPython session until we get a working extension. So what can we do? Well, everything in Python is an object, so I can just dig inside the internals of IPython and try to remove the callbacks manually. It sounds more complicated than it is. So first we need to get the IPython object. Now we look inside the events. And actually events is an event manager, so we can assign it to a variable. And now we can look inside the callbacks. And you can see that callbacks is just a dictionary that maps a given event to a list of functions that will be called. So all we have to do is to just go and clear both the pre-run cell and post-run cell lists. Okay, one more to go. Perfect, no more timing. And if we try to load our extension, reload. You can see from the scary stack trace, IPython still thinks that our extension is loaded even though we manually removed it. So hopefully last thing we have to do is to go to the extensions manager and manually remove it from the list of loaded extensions. As you can see, it's here. And hopefully that's it. So let's give it a try. It used a very old start timestamp, but that's okay. And let's give it a try. This is working. And can we actually unload it? Perfect, it's working. And all that happened in the same IPython session. Crazy, I didn't think it's gonna work. I hope you enjoyed this short presentation. There are a lot of cool things that you can do with IPython. So if you're interested, you can go check the documentation or watch my presentation where I go through most of them. Take care and enjoy the rest of PyOhio conference.